Hello, everybody. This is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey podcast. I'm joined today, and I'm joined as always by someone who at one time went by the name of Dramgalf and is occasionally known as Jason Three Names. I used to call him the White Walker, but I don't know. I was talking with Elijah the other day, and he said, he's just plain old Jason. So I'm joined by plain old Jason today.
Well, thank you for that, Elijah. Plain old Jason. Here we are.
Just plain old Jason.
Yeah. I was actually just thinking about this yesterday because, not that I'm on social media, but some of my social media handles are simply Johnston Yellen. And I thought somebody could look at that and think John, first name, Stone, middle name, Yellen, last name. But then I've still got Jason in front of all of that.
Well, the reason why it came up is Elijah and I were talking about the socials and talking about whiskey and blah, blah, blah. And it came up that someone has an Instagram handle that is Dramgalf, and it's not you. And
It's
he
definitely
said,
not me.
He said, wait, if Dramgalf isn't Jason, then what's Jason's Instagram handle, which of course you're never on there, so no one really knows. And I said, it's just Johnston Yellen. He's like, it's just plain old Jason.
Should I change Johnston Yellen to just plain old Jason?
Just plain old Jason. I would do that. And then continue to not use the socials.
Yeah. I did, I do get notifications, and sometimes I'll follow them and sometimes I won't. But I saw notifications from Backwoods Distilling Company. And given the week we've just enjoyed with that release, when they posted and they were posting their excitement and their exuberance around entering the American market for the very first time, I went on and I read the post, and it was a very, very kind post. And really, it talked very nicely about Lee reaching out to you and me, where he was already a listener of the podcast and a supporter of the podcast. And we just liked each other. It was just that simple.
Yeah,
we just
enjoyed
each other.
Yep.
And so to see that excitement and to see, where things went, getting to meet Bree as well, and then going on to make a selection and having further stories to tell with Backwoods, I just thought it was really special. It was really nice to see. And so I went on and I just posted a little comment, essentially letting them know that their last bottle from that release had sold out just in the afternoon,
right?
Before they'd gone ahead and even made their Instagram post. And so, so number one, really great to see the Backwoods excitement. Number two, you and I talked about it landing in America for months and months and months and months.
Nearing on a year. Go on.
And then it finally happened, and the nation supported the hell out of that release. And what was it, 48 hours? It went 276 bottles?
Something like that.
In 48 hours?
Yeah.
From Tuesday to Thursday?
Yeah, that is correct. So for those listeners who may feel as if they walked in on a conversation and aren't grasping the full context, Backwoods Distillery is out of Yakandanda. Am I pronouncing that right, Jason? Yakandanda.
You got Yakandanda right. You got the distillery name wrong.
I said Backwoods.
Yeah. And then you also added
Distilling Company.
If only you had, Joshua.
What did I say?
You had.
Backwoods
you
Distillery.
You said Backwoods Distillery.
Okay,
yep.
There we go. So let me try that again.
BDC.
All right.
You don't have to try anything again. We're keeping all this in. It's all good. Just keep talking.
Okay.
You're good.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Talk myself. Good thing I grabbed this shovel to keep digging. So out of Yakandanda, Australia, they're producers of both rye whiskey and single malt. And Lee
and gin,
that's right, and gin. Lee and Bree are the owners, husband and wife owners, and we had Lee on the podcast a couple years back, and then both Lee and Bree just a few months back, and just honored. We're chuffed. We're excited that we selected a rye cask. It was 3 years in a recharred Shiraz cask, basically like a rechar Shiraz cask. And what did we get? 285 bottles out of that?
276?
276?
Oh, yeah, whatever the label says. 285? Like, oh, there goes my dog.
Oh.
There's a horse and buggy going past my front door right now, and so the dog must protect me and the dear listeners of One Nation Under Whiskey.
Oh, my gosh. Yep. Protect yourselves from the Mennonites.
Oh. You've got something beeping in the background.
Yeah, I know.
What's that? Someone setting a microwave?
Yeah, no, one of my daughters is making a late lunch.
Man, you can tell we're in the summer months when we get into, dogs and horse and buggies and microwave late lunchies. It's, in the winter months, it's just you and me, closed doors, total pro level. Summer months, kids.
All right,
say the darndest things.
So let me back up before your dog interrupted, before my kids beeping interrupted. We bottled that 3-year-old cask of rye whiskey, sold out in 2 days, like you had said. And,
I did say.
And yeah, just absolutely chuffed. Really excited to get Australian rye, heritage rye, in the glasses of our dear single cask.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Have we talked about James Saxon's, who's one of the whiskey makers with Compass Box? Have we talked about his blog post where he talks about Single Cask Nation Cinematic Universe? Have we talked about that on the podcast?
I feel as if we may have, but it could just simply be that I read it, and I feel as if we may have. Right? Yeah, we did in fact talk about that, right? Where our casks are, there's almost an incestuous feel to them. Where
Nope, that's not the right word.
No. Incestuous is the right word, right?
Nope, not the right word.
I feel like
incestuous is not the thing we want to say about our cask policy.
Where we're taking casks that previously held one thing and finishing one of our other whiskeys with that cask, right? Is that what you're referring to?
Like a cinematic universe, yes.
Yeah, sounds like incest.
I would call it self-referential rather than incestuous.
I told you had hair on your palms there. Little too much self-reference. Please, they prefer the nomenclature self-referential. But your point here is that we often find, or James Saxon's point here, right? We often find life anew with casks that we'd been working with. So why don't you go ahead and expand on what you're talking about?
Oh, well, I don't actually want to say too much about it. Right. I just wanted to tease that as we continue our relationship with Backwoods, this first release will be referred to again. This first release will be part of the ongoing Single Cask Nation cinematic universe. And so I just wanted those in the US who owned a bottle, purchased a bottle, those around the world listening to the story of this project, there will be other installments. So please continue to pay close attention.
You should change your Instagram handle to Whiskey Incest.
I don't know why I would be the one changing it, given the comments from Mr. Hatton previously. A terrible thing to say about our cask program.
So listen, I know that today's guest, the good Iain McAlister from Glen Scotia, he's back with us. This is his second time on the podcast. You were out in Scotland. You were with Jess talking with Iain. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But what's not escaping me right now is the fact that A, you caught COVID while you were in Scotland, and B, much like me, you've been on this journey of regaining your sense of smell and your sense of taste. Now, when it comes to alcohol, I've been testing left, right, and center various whiskeys. Is my palate back? And I feel as if my palate is back 100%. So I decided in celebration to pour myself a bit of the Virginia Distillery Company, our VDC, the 5-year-old, from a sherry butt. Mm-hmm. And I thought that you were going to join me in that, but you're on your own journey when it comes to gaining your sense of scent, your sense of scent and smell, your sense of smell and taste back. Good gosh, it didn't work.
Please leave all of that in, because I feel like in this episode, the listeners are getting a real chance to see what I deal with on a regular basis here. So, yeah, actually, my selection here is inspired by something you and I were saying before we hit the record buttons, which, and again, this is something we've talked about on previous episodes of the podcast. And I even remember it coming from a listener question in one of the mailbag episodes. But that question that has always circled around us in tasting moments, which is, how do you calibrate your palate? How do you know your palate is working? Mm-hmm. And in the before times, it was really just a question of, okay, am I tasting what I normally taste here? Have I had something, in a menu item or something in my mouth that has kind of distracted from the calibration? Mm-hmm. But now here we are dealing with this loss of taste and smell from COVID. I'm very excited to hear that you're 100% back. I definitely am not. The progress that I've made in the last 6 days is coffee at least now smells like coffee. Wine at least smells and tastes like wine. Okay. There's nothing subtle happening. I'm just getting broad strokes.
Oh, so you've got wine-flavored wine and coffee-flavored coffee, but you're not finding those deeper, a little bit of chocolate, a little bit of raspberry going on. Got it. Okay.
Right, yeah. Right. Yeah. And so so that's a bit wild. However, 6 days ago, coffee didn't taste or smell like coffee. Wine didn't taste or smell like wine.
Did it smell or taste like anything in particular, or was it dead?
No,
like completely.
No,
nothing?
It was empty space. It was wild, absolutely wild. And I'll tell you this: I was sitting Saturday lunchtime. I was in my brother and sister-in-law's house in Ayr, and I was having some leftover chana masala with coconut lemon rice.
Oh yeah, you did. Yum yum.
And I warmed it up. And I brought it into the living room to sit on the couch and eat it. And my sister-in-law said, "Wow, I can really smell your lunch." And it was the first moment where I thought, oh, I can't. Oh, wow. And I actually brought the bowl up to my face, stuck my nose in it, and there was just empty space.
And you had turmeric all over your face, just wet turmeric all over your face.
The tip of my nose has been stained yellow ever since I did that. But I just... Yeah. It was almost like she was playing a trick on me.
Wow.
Where there was no aroma and she was busy telling me there was tons of aroma. So that was the moment, actually, where I thought, oh, I have lost my sense of taste and smell here. And so out of that, I started paying attention. That's when I realized, oh, I can't smell or taste coffee. I can't smell or taste wine. And so as the week's gone along, being able to actually say, oh, it smells and tastes like coffee. It smells and tastes like wine. That's kind of a broad stroke. So for you, before we hit record, you had said you'd been using your Glenmorangie
original,
10, your Glenmorangie
10-year-old
traditional, original.
Yeah.
Your Glenmorangie original, and that's your palate resetter. Mm-hmm. That's when you know where you reside. And so instead of pouring our Virginia Distillery Company, which has again been wonderfully supported by the nation, we filled a butt of that, which has been brilliant. Still about 100 bottles of that left. It'll go back on sale in July. But I pulled the Great King Street Glasgow blend as an opportunity to explore my palate and see where I am with it.
So do you use the Glasgow's blend Great King Street as your, like, is that your go-to? Like, well, is my palate right? Is that your go-to? Like the Glenmorangie 10-year-old is my go-to, or do you have a variety?
I think it has become my go-to because I drink it so often, because it's such a comforting go-to for me.
Yeah.
And because during the pandemic, I included it in so many tastings, I know where the fruit lives. I know where the subtle smoke lives. At the strength of it, it's not overwhelming the palate. I think that's something you've been discussing with our Catoctin Creek, and we'll get to it again in today's interview, the balance. Right, balance is such an important factor in that Catoctin Creek, as it is over in this Glasgow blend, and so I do know where it lives. And as I sit here nosing it, I haven't actually tasted it yet, but as I'm nosing it, it smells like I'm nosing with a little bit of a cold. The nose is quite muted on it.
Yeah.
And so it's not quite whiskey smelling whiskey, but the fruit doesn't have nuance. The fruit isn't, is it mango or is it pineapple? Is it green apples or green? It's just a muted fruitiness that I'm getting.
Yeah, that checks out. Yeah, for me, as I was working to get my sense of smell and my palate back, I was just getting straight alcohol. Like nothing smelled. Whiskey was not smelling like whiskey. It just smelled of alcohol. And then it would be just sort of very general, like a bit of oak, a bit of vanilla. Right, and then not much after that, but then, and here was the other thing for me. I started getting my sense of smell back before I got my palate back. So there was a point where I was smelling my Glenmo 10, and I said, "Oh my gosh, I think I've got it back. That smells exactly how I remember it." And I go to taste it, and it is wildly different. It just tastes of alcohol and maybe a hint of fruit, but just like, it's so interesting how the two did not come back in tandem.
And while you were chatting and I was listening to you, I tasted it and my mind has just been blown. And I think you've done a nice job of articulating.
Yeah.
I just got more wood on the palate of that Glasgow blend than I ever get on the palate. And it's been interesting because over the week I've noticed like bitter coming back and bitter being quite pronounced. I'm getting an astringent woodiness from the palate of the Glasgow blend, a component I never get. Never get.
No, it's not an astringent, overly oaky whiskey. That is so very interesting.
Prepare to fast forward!
Preparing to fast forward.
Fast forward!
Fast forwarding, sir.
I'm glad that you brought up Catoctin Creek, and I'm glad listening back to the conversation with Iain McAlister, how he was talking about the Catoctin Creek. I'm going to hold my comments until after we hear from Iain, because the things he said, when you have the distillery manager say such nice things about a whiskey that we fully believed in and knew it was going to present flavors that would take people off guard, but figured most people would understand it and get it and love it. When I heard him, I mean, granted, everybody we talked to has given us that validation, like, holy crap, is that a whiskey? You know what? I'm not going to hold on to my statements here.
I was going to say, you're doing a fantastic job holding your comment.
And so, you know, the number of people that, without me prompting them, say, this is so balanced. There is so much going on here that in and of themselves wouldn't work well, but all not necessarily work well, but once you put them all together, I didn't expect the balance that came through on this whiskey. And I would always respond with, and this happened with Christopher Sebastian Seabass a week or two ago on Instagram. And he may not have mentioned balance, so I may have brought that up. But my point to everyone when they bring up this whiskey is you must have a really sophisticated palate to be getting all of that. Like, you should be... There's so many people who come across and they say, well, I either like a whiskey or I don't like a whiskey. And even those people, right, where they're not, like you had said, you like as you're going through this, getting your sense of smell and taste back, and you're getting whiskey-smelling whiskey or coffee-smelling coffee, a lot of people say, I either like a whiskey or I don't like a whiskey. And when they say to me, wow, there's a lot going on here. There's a smokiness, there's a sweetness, there's a spiciness, and it's all like nothing's overtaken. And some of these people are people I know that say, I either like a whiskey or I don't like a whiskey. And I say to them, you have a more sophisticated palate than you know. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And that's been really great for us as the bottlers. And I think it's been great for people who've been opening the bottle and who've been enjoying it, because it proves to them that their palate is much stronger than they think it is if they see all of those components and they see the balance within that whiskey.
Yeah, and just for the record here, when Jess and I showed up at Iain's office, we were just doing what you do when you see a friend for the first time in years. You just pour a dram. Yeah. Right? We'd already poured off the record, and there was no discussion, no understanding that Iain was going to discuss this once the mics were turned on. Yeah. We were just sitting having a chat. And the fact that he brought it up quite early on in our recording was a great honor. You mentioned honor earlier in working with Backwoods and bottling Backwoods. It was a great honor to listen to Iain talk about his interpretation of the Catoctin Creek. Mm-hmm. And then we went on to talk about his stuff, his bottlings, his releases. And for the purposes of this conversation, we really weren't steering it in a particular direction. I will tell our listeners this, and then we'll go over to the interview. As we were sitting there, the three of us, in Iain's office, and we're just dramming away and chatting away, and there's not a microphone in sight, there were a couple of times when I said to Iain, I hate to do it, Iain, but stop right there, because I want to ask you that on the podcast. Yeah. And after I did that a couple of times, maybe a third time, I said, should we maybe set up the recording equipment? Because just as the three of us sat there having a chat, that was exactly what I wanted the interview to be. And then once we turned on the mics, we just had the exact chat we'd been sitting there having. And so one of the things that I'm always most proud of with our podcast here are the number of listeners who write in. I already had write in my head, so I was thinking people read writing. The number of listeners who write in and say, I felt like a fly on the wall. Yeah. In this episode, you are definitely a fly on the wall of the distillery manager's office at Glen Scotia Distillery in Campbeltown on the Mull of Kintyre. So here we are today sitting with Iain McAlister, the bearded Iain McAlister, the handsomely bearded Iain McAlister, in the distillery manager's office here at Glen Scotia in Campbeltown. Thanks for joining us, Iain.
My pleasure. Thank you very much. Pleasure to have you here. But in fact, I don't know when the last time you were here, and it's been too long.
Far too long. And we're also joined with our very dear Jess Lomas.
Hello.
I wish the listeners could see Jess blushing right now. That is fantastic. You're not often lost for words, but right now this feels a little awkward.
Just not sure how to respond to that other than to sort of lean into the mic and whisper like, hello. To whoever's listening.
Honestly, Jess, it's amazing how it robs you of your, normal conversation, normal life. Especially with whiskey, it's pretty straightforward. But once you put a camera or a microphone in front of anyone, well, me in particular, it seems to be.
No, I
I've
definitely
lost. Yeah.
Suddenly, everything I knew has disappeared into the whiskey.
My mind's went a blank.
Well, the trick for us on the podcast is the three of us are sitting here having a lovely conversation around this table. And I'm just thinking to myself, how can we get 40 to 50,000 friends round about this table to hear this conversation along with us? And that's all we're doing. We're just inviting them into the conversation. So no need to be nervous. We're all amongst friends.
Absolutely. And that's what I just mentioned there. That this table 5-10 minutes previously was lovely. Well, it was clear. It was devoid of all whiskey elements. Now it's awash with lovely bottles of whiskey here. Not all Glen Scotia, I may add. There's a rather nice single cask nation bottle sitting here.
Cheers. It's an honour to pour it for you, and your very kind words about the Catoctin Creek and our friends at Catoctin Creek and our friends at Kilholman, who were kind enough to help us with a hoggy there as well. But just watching your face, tasting that, listening to your comments really meant a ton to me, to the company, to the nation. So
top whiskey, honestly. And if I don't know what the release quantity is on it, but if you get a chance to try this, buy this whiskey. That's what I'm saying. Buy this whiskey. It's super.
We sold it via lottery. It wasn't even a general release. It was via lottery, and it sold out. 182 bottles don't hang around very long in the nation, especially when it's this tasty.
Well, absolutely. That's testament to yourself. I mean, the quality is outstanding. It really is. It's a wonderful, wonderful dram.
Well, now it's my turn to blush, so thank you ever so much. Listen, we're not here to talk about us and Catoctin Creek, even though they are wonderful. We're sitting here, it's the Friday afternoon. You've put in a Campbeltown Malts week. How has it been for you?
It's been tough. It's been it's been probably one of the toughest actually. I think it's just been but in a nice way. I don't mean that in a bad way. Yeah. It's been full on. It's been honestly, it's been great to see everybody back again. It's great to see the old faces, new faces. It's great to see everyone's engaged in whiskey and really desperate to come back to Campbeltown. But as I say, it's been so busy.
So what did you do for folk this week? What was the Glen Scotia attraction aside from the handsomely bearded Iain McAlister?
You're too kind. Excuse me. My time to blush now. I mean, it's So with Becky Paskin, with the whiskey experiment, with Mr. Charles. I was working with Becky in that, with Mr. Charles McLean, who was helping me with the Dunnage Warehouse tastings, which was fantastic. That was, looking at different casks, looking at Glen Scotia, how it predominantly bourbon or bourbon-esque cask, how it reacted with these from a time frame of 5 years, 7 months up to 6 years, 1 month. Strength went from 59.2 to 60.8. So just try to understand all the dynamics of what's involved in that.
So what were you finding? One of the things we've talked about on the podcast is whiskey maturation being non-linear, and sometimes you'll get pleasant surprises, and sometimes you'll just have to be a wee bit more patient, given the access you've got to what you're maturing here at Glen Scotia. What do you see? What do you smell? What's your experience of maturation here at Glen Scotia, and how was that reflected in the tasting you were doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, maturation for me, you know, it's well, obviously the viewers can't see behind Jess there, but there's new make spirit sitting on a shelf on the wall. I mean, that new make spirit, I personally feel if you get the new make spirit right, you can do so much with that. You know, there's so much you can do. Maturation should always, and I think I've mentioned this before, maturation should always be complementary. It should always add. I mean, if you're relying on maturation to really impart the full essence of the distillery, then I think it's going to be. Yeah, I think it's going to be slightly difficult, you know. So yeah, it's complementary, part of the process.
So you were very kind about our pour there, but you've also been very kind with your pours. And as we were talking Catoctin Creek rye in a Kilchoman Hoggy, you did what I think Jess and I and Joshua and many of our listeners do, is I could see the wheels turning and you thought, there's something you need to be tasting right now. And you went ahead and pulled out a Glen Scotia, ostensibly in bourbon.
Yes.
But there's more to the story there. Can you tell us a little bit about that cask that you poured for us and kind of that surprise that you had?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, the viewers can't see that, but obviously I was mentioning the full labelling of this bottle, which is quite clear.
I was going to add here for the viewers, listeners, that you reached for the bottle to pick up to tell us the label, and none of you at home can see this. There isn't a label, or it's an invisible ink. It could be an invisible ink label. It's a new innovation.
Absolutely. It's as Jess says, there's nothing on the label. But when I tasted the Catoctin Creek, you know, this Glen Scotia basically came to mind, and this is a 2005, ostensibly a first fill bourbon. You would say, yep, absolutely, first fill bourbon maturation. But I can always remember tasting it in the Dunnage warehouse, and there was something special about it. And yeah, lo and behold, it had that rye influence. Slight rye sinew running through it there, which gave it that slightly spicy aspect, you know. So it was, it's a lot to understand, I think.
So it's one of the things Jess and I have been talking about this week as we've been driving around Scotland and having plenty of wonderful visits, is that sometimes Scotch single malt, when it meets rye, it can be battered into submission.
Yes.
And yet here we've got that little bit of spice. And the comment that I'd made to you before we hit record was, if you'd handed that to me and said, there's a first fill bourbon Glen Scotia,
yes, I
would have said, I get the bourbon influence there, the softness and all that. But then there's this spice, and I would have maybe attributed that to the spirit of Glen Scotia.
Yes.
And so when you're talking about this kind of complementary, are you recognising your Glen Scotia spirit running through here, but then identifying that rye, that spice coming from the cask?
Absolutely, Jason. I think it's a, and I'm no different than anyone else. It is a journey. You know, you're trying to understand all the effects that these casks have on the spirit. Glen Scotia spirit is it's a simple spirit, classic double pot still distillation. It's the same spirit. It could be peated, or, 3 different levels of peating, lightly, medium, or heavily peated. But it's just understanding how the different, and as I say, we use the word bourbon. We sent bourbon.
Yeah.
What is bourbon?
Yeah.
And for me, it's a journey I'm trying to really nail down and understand and getting to the bottom of, because Glen Scotia works so well with bourbon casks. What type of bourbon really, does it work really well with Maker's Mark? Does it work well with a Jim Beam? Is it a level 4 char? Is it is it a 4-hour toasting on a Jack Daniels or a 4-minute heavily char. So there's different things to understand there, and really what works with Glen Scotia. So yeah, it's a journey. It is a journey.
And definitely the kind of journey that the nation like to ask questions. Something like the idea of just bourbon is definitely, we've talked about walking through a warehouse and seeing names appearing on casks. That's definitely, and then at the end of the day, it all just gets slapped under a bourbon label. So it's really exciting to hear that it's not just us being like, I wonder if this is all bourbon, is maybe all from X distillery, or is it just we've grabbed a handful of bourbon casks that were ready to go and were selected. So yeah, I'm definitely intrigued with that as well.
It is. I actually, yesterday was obviously the Glen Scotia, it was actually Wednesday, but yesterday the Coopers were still here. I'm lost.
It's been a long week.
It's been a long week. So the Coopers were still here yesterday from Loch Lomond. So brilliant. Seen the guys, took the opportunity, obviously, ask them a few questions about different casks, and how they treat the casks, and whether they're still predominantly getting a lot of these casks, because obviously a lot of these bourbon casks will come from the US to Loch Lomond. The Coopers will assess them, and then they'll come to me. So it's quite good to understand whether they're still coming whole or whether they come loose. Or...
I was just going to ask you that question. Do you have the answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Please, continue.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, it's always been, it's, through the years it's changed, So initially I always used to get them fully made, some wonderful casks. And in fairness, I prefer them like that. But I think it's a case of, what you're willing to pay. So if you're willing to pay top dollar, you're going to get the best casks. It's like anything in life, I guess. But it changed, and I used to get loose casks, but now I'm back to whole casks. So I'm basically getting a container with, 210 casks in it.
Wow.
A lot of Jim Beam casks, which again really works well, with the Glen Scotia New Make Spirit. But yeah.
What do you think it is that works so well there? Is it a softness? Is it back to that complementary quality that you're talking about? When you stick your nose into that empty cask before you put the Glen Scotia New Make in it, what are you getting from that empty cask that's got you excited for the maturation in it? I tend
to, and as I say, there's some of these casks, and it's got a lot to do with the peating level. It could be a Jack Daniels or a Heaven Hill, which tends to work slightly better with the peated end of Glen Scotia.
Interesting.
But the Jim Beams really work well with the non-peated.
Yeah.
A lot to do with the charn, a lot to do with the and again, for me, it's something I really need to nail down. I've got so much in the information, but I've not got the full picture yet. I need to go there and find out, as we mentioned.
Excellent excuse for a trip, because every day is a school day, right? So you need to, you can only learn it by going there. I like this.
Absolutely, Jess.
It's a suggestion I make regularly. I could only possibly understand sherry casks if I go to Jerez.
That's it. A company trip, Ive.
That's it.
Like, if you can all hear Joshua's eyes rolling as I'm saying this, you can edit that in.
But no, as I say, it's absolutely, for me, it's mind-boggling. As I say, the simplicity of New Make Spirit, but the dynamics and the variation in these casks is absolutely amazing. Sure. Maker's Mark's another one. Maker's Mark, what's incredible with Glen Scotia? Wonderful.
I never like to go begging, and you've been incredibly generous. For the listeners, you talk about getting a work trip out of this. For the listeners, could we taste a little bit of the Glen Scotia New Make with you and have you talk us through that for the listeners?
Yeah, absolutely.
Would that be all right? Yeah. You can pop your mic down. Josh will put in some Jeopardy music here. So Thanks ever so much for this, Ian. I really appreciate you not letting my begging fall on deaf ears here.
That could have got awkward really quickly.
Very quickly. Like, I'm really sorry, Jason. We don't pour Glen Scotia New Make for anybody. It's not even the listeners of One Nation Under Whiskey.
No, not at all. Not at all. Pleasure.
So please, if you would, could you talk us through what you're getting, nose, palate, and then the components that you're looking to be complemented with these bourbon casks?
Yeah.
I think this will be so illustrative.
Well, it would, and it's, as I say, it's just a pity you can't see my glass here because first thing I do is roll the glass. Mm-hmm. You know, just give the glass a little roll. This is 63.5%, so this is cask filling strength for us, and it's a lovely. It looks clean. It looks fresh. It's got viscosity. You know, so there's a lovely gloopy nature to it, if you like. You know, so it's got that lovely, slightly heavier aspect to it there. You see the oils, Campbeltown oils.
Got some nice beading in there. For those of you who are playing along at home with the tasting notes game, beading. Tick off beading on your tasting card.
Well said.
It's got this wonderfully heavy meniscus to the top of it as well.
Yes. You look at that. Look. That's unbelievable. Sorry for saying that. Look at that.
Yeah, no, Joshua and I do the same thing.
It's a regular feature on this podcast. Look at the colour of this dram as I'm driving along thinking, very helpful, guys. Also for the listeners, I just got excited and I went to sniff the microphone and not the glass. And I haven't even had a full dram yet, so this is going to end well.
Well done, Jess.
Talking into the glass and sniffing the microphone. So basically you've, as I say, you've got lovely background oils there, okay? If you nose it, and you might get it, you might not get it, but there is, even at this stage, there is subtle salinity, which is quite interesting.
Yeah.
There's a linen aspect. You really get a fruit. There's a little bit of fruit in there.
That's where my nose goes to straight away. But when you added in the salinity, it really rounded out that fruit note. Yeah. And your linen note is pro level. That's
Yeah.
We're in the company of a master.
I often get in New Make, like specifically like boiled sweets that we would have had in the car as kids. So here, and a lot of New Makes for me carry a rhubarb and custard kind of.
Yes.
And this is it is in this one, but maybe not as prevalent as some other New Makes that I've smelled. But it does. I think it rewards you. It is there. It's a little bit softer at the back of the nose for me.
Yes.
But it's lovely. It's a lovely. It smells like a thick New Make.
It does. It's Campbeltown, you know, and that's what you want with Campbeltown. You want
funk.
that exactly. Let's try it. Let's give it a wee try.
Okay.
Slanger, guys.
Slange.
Slange indeed. That doesn't drink like 63.5.
No, it doesn't.
Does not.
That's real soft.
It's real lovely, as I say, you get a lovely balance. You get the mouth coating oils, you get that salinity, you get fruit, that linen aspect. Yeah, it's obviously, it's quite well balanced, but it's got the regionality. You need that robustness. I think you mentioned it, funkiness. Well, you're going to get more of that funkiness as it, you know, it obviously builds up that relationship with the casks, you know, so it'll slightly change. You could be a little bit of smoky peat if that was a peated New Make in there, which would obviously add to the regionality.
So to come back to what you'd said earlier that kind of prompted Jason to go begging was you talked about this kind of a delicate, a soft spirit from Glen Scotia. And so when you're dealing with that New Make and you're thinking about these 210 bourbon casks that are coming in the container, on one hand, I would imagine you're careful with this. You're not going to overwhelm this. However, that cask that we tried earlier and we talked about here, I'm surprised the rye component did so well with the Glen Scotia. And I feel like if someone had come into you and said, this cask has a good bit of rye influence in it, Would you have been a bit nervous to put Glen Scotia in that?
Absolutely, absolutely. You know, it's a journey. You know, and there's no definite answer. You've really got to try it to find out. And I think when you do try it and you nail down the basics, and that's back to that old bourbon and bourbon question again. You know, I think when you do nail it, and it could be the same with sherry. You know, it could be the same with anything really, PX, whatever, Oloroso. But I think when you do understand what's going on, you know, the relationship and how that relationship pans out, how it's matured, where it's matured, I guess the orientation of the casks, you know, everything like that. I think when you get a full understanding of something like that, then it puts you in a better footing to maybe predict what you're going to get at the end of it. Maybe. That's a big maybe.
I wish the listeners could see your eyes there. You were being cautious with the word predict there. I saw that. Sorry, Jess, I didn't mean to talk over you. No, not
at all. I was going to say that while you guys are talking, I just went back. So the new make, which is dangerously drinkable, like that is great. You could do a lot with that as well. You can make it. You could make it into whiskey, but you could also, I would drink that as like a highball. That's great. I just wanted to see. I love when I'm given the opportunity to try a new make. So thank you very much. It's lovely
pleasure.
to then see if you've got something else that's further down the line of this maturation, to see what happens to that new make, those characters that are obviously the bare bones of Glen Scotia, see where that's gone. So like I've just nipped back a dram to our lovely bourbon cask here, and it's lovely to see those flavours and that even the still same texture, because we often talk about texture,
always
is here
Yes.
in the bourbon. I'll let you decide whether or not it's got the same nose texture to the
And you're talking about the bourbon with the rye influence, or are you talking about
this
the
9-year-old
nine-year-old?
the 9-year-old bourbon barrel, which is delicious.
Yeah. I wanted to exactly lead into that. And so, Iain, with Jess bringing us to this point, as you put this new make next to this 9-year-old first fill bourbon barrel, but this was the single cask for the festival dinner this week.
Yes.
And we're privileged to be drinking this with you as well. Thank you for that also. Could you talk a little bit, partly on what you're seeing in that 9-year bourbon, but that journey that you've been mentioning here? Can you take us on that journey from this new make into this 9-year-old single cask?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's obviously, as I say, that's the secret, I think. It's understanding exactly what's going on, what the relationship is. This one is a Jim Beam. Okay,
Jim Beam on this one.
So it's obviously trying to understand how it develops, and the best way to do that, obviously, is to really keep an eye on it. So I keep an eye on a lot of these casks. The Dunwich area, for anyone that's visited Glen Scotia, has got a lot of that experimental stuff where it's single casks, where you're obviously just trying to understand the relationship between the wood and the spirit. So yeah, I mean, as soon as it's filled, you're really on the case. You're keeping an eye on it. You're assessing it and seeing how it develops. As I say, because every cask I had in the festival, it was 5 years, 7 months up to 6 years, 1 month. So there was a narrow window there, 5 different casks. So just trying to assess them and understand that transition from the spirit, you make spirit, to whiskey. And what influences that? What relationship with particular American oak, Quercus alba, is obviously is obviously pushing the spirit on that journey. So it is quite a complex affair. There's a lot of chemical interaction there, additive and subtractive and oxidization and hydrolysis. And if only it was simple as understanding the process in cask A as it is in cask B. It's wonderful. It really is. But that said, I think when you do understand the relationship, and exactly what's going on with these casks, and is this going to work over the long term, then I think it really, it starts to make sense.
Just very quickly from my own perspective here, when I was first nosing this 9-year-old single cask first fill bourbon, it was very buttery to me.
Yes.
And that was kind of the pronounced note. Going from the new make spirit into this 9-year bourbon cask, I've actually got more spice on it. I've got more cask presence happening there than I did originally when it was very bourbon forward for me.
Yep.
And that's, we talk about this a lot, where all of this tasting is contextual.
Yep.
Right? I'm traveling with a very good friend, Bert, who's a very supportive listener as well, and he and I talk about this lack of objectivity. It's all subjective in the tasting of this.
Yes.
And I could, my question for you is, as you go from nosing in a warehouse, nosing and tasting in that warehouse, to then doing the same in this office, to then hosting a dinner and pouring it, do you get different notes as you go along, as the context changes?
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that, Jason, because part of the festival was the whiskey experiment with Becky Paskin.
Mm-hmm. Go on.
And that was that was an eye opener for me, because she was introducing, there was just two whiskies. There was a double cask, and there was a cask finished, cask strength whiskey I had, a 2012 lightly peated from. It was basically over 2 years in first fill Oloroso. So she was basically looking, and she'd done it remarkably well. She was looking at colour, she was looking at shape, and she was looking at sound with the whiskey. Yeah.
Shape and sound.
Oh no, we've introduced
sound.
a new thing.
Yeah.
I thought nose texture was the end. Oh no. Yes.
So
Go on.
Yeah, I mean this was unbelievable. So potentially you could, you look at yellow light, how that gives a different dynamics, a different influence in the to the whiskey.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You could look at shape. So if you look at through a star, then it's obviously look at through a star. Then it's obviously gives you that different slight spicy notes, slightly more maybe what you're getting in the rye whiskies and such like. So there's different aspects like that. Whereas you obviously get a sound, so you could have sea in the rocks, then you get more of that salinity.
I have heard of tastings like that with the principle of sound, where all the participants get like a headset or AirPods or whatever you want, and then each dram is paired with music.
I've seen our boutique boys do this.
Yeah, and I've seen Ewan Henderson does the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
When he used to run his
yeah.
Scotch broth events, he used to do the same thing. He was also famous for his party trick of making everybody wear like blindfolds, which I think was really just for him to take a picture of a room of 120 people all in blindfolds. That's a bit Doctor Who like that. But yeah, I love the idea of your brain actually is involved in much more of the sensory processing of whiskey than you think. For example, I've done tastings where we've had glasses which are blue, so it blocks all sort of light. So you can't, we as whiskey drinkers, we love having a rainbow of different coloured whiskies in front of us. I've seen it, everything's in a blue glass, so that that part of your brain is. It's not a distraction for you to think about, that's got a lovely, look at this dark sherry colour, which we all do, even though we talk constantly about how we shouldn't look at a bottle and be like, it's a dark one, and yet the three of us have done it with a Catoctin Creek. Ooh, look at the colour of that. So,
exactly. I know.
It's really, it fascinates me. It's very interesting.
It is and I found it actually quite thought provoking. I really enjoyed it. And it is as Becky was asking, the participants in the experiment, is say what shape is yellow,
Oh, paging Mark Watt.
That's exactly who I just thought about. Mark Watt.
Hi, Mark.
Just sitting across the tune from us.
So yeah, it's quite interesting. I tend to work more environmental. I tend to work with influences like about me, about the town, about maritime oiliness, and the deck. Caulking, deck pitch and things like that. I tend to work with things like that, things that comes from memory and so that kind of works for me. But yeah, it's an interesting subject.
Granny's seaside attic is always a good one. That's
Absolutely.
anything that takes you back to being a child is a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Absolutely.
I think that's why a lot of tasting notes are very easily related to things you had as a child, because that really early development of your olfactory memory is so long lasting. But also, as a single cask nation, I really enjoy because then it becomes very specific to where you grew up. So like there's lots of tasting notes that these guys will give me for specific confectionery or candies, and I'm like, I have no idea what you're talking about. But similarly, I can be talking about stuff that they're like, no, what is this? And then we have the same candies with the same name that are entirely different, like American Smarties are absolute garbage, whereas I love the Smarties I grew up with.
Whoa, it's got controversial already. Oh my God.
And I will stand by that.
Oh, I know you will. It reminds me of a story Dave Broom tells of doing a tasting in Japan, where every time he's talking, the translator is putting it into Japanese for the gathered audience, and he's going along and he makes reference to clouty dumpling, and the interpreter is talking Japanese, and then says clouty dumpling, and just keeps going with the Japanese after that. It's one of those things where
there's no word to describe it.
No, it's got clouty dumpling at Dave's tasting in Japan. It's just been dropped, and we've all moved on.
Yeah.
I thought that was cracking.
Yon Scottish thing. Yon Scottish pudding, cake, and whatever.
I think if you're going to have the audacity to drop something like that in a tasting, you should at least be forced to bring said clouty dumpling to someone who's literally never heard of it before, so that they're like, I mean, your mind would run wild, especially when we consume things like haggis in Scotland. You could panic really badly and be like, clouty dumpling, what animal does that resemble, you know?
I know.
Because I think a clouty dumpling does look a little bit like a haggis, but before I sidetrack
it does.
It's got a touch of it about it.
Aye. Suet and
absolutely
boiled in your granny's bed sheets or whatever.
Aye, that's right. I remember it well. You take me back now, Jess. I'll tell you, my goodness, I feel my age.
Dave also talks about Mizunara oak having a component that's like the incense that they burn in a Japanese temple, a Buddhist temple. And I'm like, Dave, you haven't helped me understanding Mizunara oak, but incense, all right. I do know incense, but I don't know the one that burns in the Buddhist temple. Like,
no.
You've just reverse clouty dumplinged me.
Can I go on a trip to Japan for a Buddhist temple so I can understand this further?
Right.
I'll just write these all down.
Like, Mizunara oak is so important. We all need to go to Japan and experience Buddhist temples and burning incense.
You never know when it might come in handy.
Well, that's it. I don't know. And yet, knowing what little I know about Mizunara oak, I know it's incredibly hard to work with, so I'm not sure I want too many of them.
And expensive. But talk of Mizunara as a perfect transition into the next thing I was going to ask you about, and it's fascinating listening to you talk about the journey and your new make spirit going on a journey in these bourbon casks and these sherry casks. Is there a cask that's surprised you for Glen Scotia? Is there something off the beaten path? Any version of a wine cask or anything you've seen in your time here that surprised you?
I think, Jason, to be honest with you, the whole journey has been quite an eye-opener for me, really. When you consider Glen Scotia, I mean, Glen Scotia at best, the spirit quality, tell the truth and shame the devil, the spirit quality, when you go far enough back, was quite variable. So
I thought you were really going to go off piste there, and you ended up at variable.
We'll leave it at that. We'll leave it at that because I do work here. So,
to come back in on Monday after your holiday.
Absolutely,
and we've identified him at the top of the show. It's not an insider scoop.
So yes. So I mean, there was certain aspects that really stood out to me. But what I like, as I say about the younger stuff, back to this younger stuff again, I love the way that it is this, one type of new make spirit, but it works so well in a number of different factors, if you like, a number of different casks, a number of different situations. Could be sherry, it could be, it's works with sherry very well. You know, it could be second fill sherry, new make spirit into it. It could be we'll just call them bourbon. It could be the different bourbon aspects. It could be that Oloroso influence. It could be finishing, you know, in different casks. It could be red wine. It could be Bordeaux red wine. So there's a huge raft of casks who really, really works well. But I think it's important also, and it's probably worth mentioning, that Glen Scotia historically has got to really work with casks that really have a historical association with the town.
Okay.
So what you mentioned, obviously, you know, we're talking about Mizunara oak and things like that. Things like that, I think, would be quite interesting, but would they tie in with what we're trying to do, you know, what the distillery is all about, really? Probably not so much. So the bourbon influence, absolutely, something that would come in the 30s, 40s, more the 40s, really.
Yeah. So there's a tradition at play, even though you're, I think, and we've spoken to you a fair few times, doing a wonderful job through these first, you know, couple of decades of the 21st century here. You're still tying this back to the town and the sense of place and the people. That's really interesting.
Yep. I think it's something that you've really got to hold true, you know, and it is part of the distillery. Absolutely, you know, the spirit that we produce now is slightly different than the spirit it was produced 30, 40 years ago. But luckily enough, I actually have that's a 10 cl bottle. So I have roughly about a 10 cl bottle of new make spirits from Lochhead Distillery in 1928.
Wow.
So this was analysed. It was done by, not me, you know, it was done by people who know what they're talking about with new make spirits.
People with mass spectrometers.
Exactly. Professors and...
people in white lab coats.
Yeah.
Yes. So they looked at it, and do you know well, what really blew me away with that was what we produce today is remarkably similar to what that new make spirit was like. So it's lost a lot of volatility for sure. You know, it's slightly polished because it's that old. But it's remarkably similar to what we produce today. And that, for me, was mind-blowing. It really was that, hey, we're not that different. You know, things are remarkably similar. So hence why the casks and the sherry casks, Campbeltown would have a huge influence with sherry casks, especially Iberian Peninsula. Red wine casks, maybe not so much at certain periods in the 19th century for sure, but the ports, the ruby ports, and the tawny ports, things like that. So yeah, it's just tying that down and make sure we keep that all that regionality there.
We talk quite a lot about this idea of sense of place within whiskey, and it's a really difficult and I guess important balancing act for you when you're making decisions about casks and how the direction of the distillery to maintain a sense of place with, but not let that stop you from progressing and feeling like if come next year you want to do a whole release in Mizunara oak, there's nothing really stopping you from doing so. You're not tied to the idea of Glen Scotia we only use, for example, you know, red wine is our thing and that's all we will mature in. We've talked a lot about that this week as we've been travelling around with various people about the idea of like having the freedom to progress, and something that we're not so good at in Scotland because we have so much tradition.
Yes.
But there's an idea that you don't want to stray too far from it. Whereas if you're, I guess what I would call a new world distillery, you've got a little bit more freedom. There's nothing to tie you.
Yes.
You know, if you want to take a sharp left turn and go on this mad trip through cask exploration, you can. And I think we're not as good at that here in Scotland. But I also, to play devil's advocate with myself, I don't think that's a bad thing. If you know what works with you, you should be proud enough to be like, no, this is, you know, stick to it and be like, yes, it works for us in the direction we want to take. So really, I mean, my point has kind of cancelled itself out beautifully, but you've got to listen to my voice for a minute.
I totally get where you're coming from, and that's exactly the way I look at it. You're absolutely spot on. You've nailed it there. It is nice to have that, you know, that tradition, that regionality, but yeah, it would be nice to obviously do things that's maybe slightly out, outside the parameters, if you like,
Yeah.
And you've got to, and it's, it's wonderful. And then, even a lot of, the festival release we've released for obviously the festival this week, which came out slightly before the festival. That was an 8-year-old. That was actually the same. So what you're tasting there, the 2013 first fill bourbon, that was a 2013, but it was heavily peated, 54.5, 7.5 years in the bourbon, and then a year's finishing in the sherry, so Oloroso sherry. Sorry, PX sherry.
PX.
Excuse me.
It's been a long week. We're
has
very
been
forgiving. Our listeners are very forgiving.
Sherry.
You're still
Yes.
upright. I think that's hugely commendable.
My voice is my voice is quite husky. Too much talking. But yeah, I mean that shows you what you can do. Even with the same dynamics as Jess said there. With the same dynamics, you can still put different twists in things. A little bit of peat, raise the peat, lower the peat, slightly less, slightly longer, and the sherry. PX. So. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of that history and speaking of that sense of place, we're finally seeing new distilleries being announced for Campbeltown. And it's so interesting to me because, as Joshua has said on the podcast previously, Springbank is experiencing a papification where if you just know a wee bit about Scotch, Springbank is a slam dunk home run. That's the one people go get.
Yes.
And we keep saying to people, there are literally thousands more things you could be drinking.
Yeah.
I think that the journey that you've taken Glen Scotia on, and I'm being very honest with you, since you went a touch off-piste earlier, I'll go a wee bit more off-piste here. Back in the 90s when I was getting into whiskey, there were 3 distilleries I didn't touch. One was Scapa, one was Jura, and one was Glen Scotia. And I feel like since about 2008, we've really seen a change in Glen Scotia. And as I'm thinking about these new distilleries coming to Campbeltown, if that had happened in the 90s or the very early 2000s, I wonder if we may have seen Glen Scotia fade out, fade away. For you, being in charge here and seeing what you're doing, what's the current state of Glen Scotia, and how do you see the birth of these new distilleries coming to your town?
Yeah, I mean, excellent point, Jason. It really is. Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, Glen Scotia, I don't know how it survived because, as I mentioned earlier, the spirit quality was at best variable, and that's been kind. That's been very kind. It was no fault of the distillery. It was no fault of the people that weren't in the distillery. It was the management team at that time. It was the parameters that they were obviously they were looking at. So the Glen Scotia was probably, unfortunately, it was the situation. It was basically the situation it was operating in. It's where it was at that time, which was sad. But the positive thing about Glen Scotia, it survived. It did keep going, which is quite remarkable. And I don't know whether I mentioned this earlier or no, but if I knew, probably when I started at Glen Scotia, coming into Glen Scotia, if I knew what was ahead of me, I would have said, nah, I'll not bother. So it's wonderful to see it regain its confidence.
That's well put.
Well
put.
It's back there.
It feels like a confident brand in its packaging. Where, and I know, and we may have brought this up the last time we spoke with you, but the neon cows, the fluorescent cows, felt like they were kind of finding their way as well. And what's this new Glen Scotia going to look like? And the neon cows have come and gone. And even as I look over your shoulder and I'm looking at your shelves in this office, there's confident branding going on.
Yes.
That speaks to a little bit more of the traditional, but in a modern way. And I think it's a really striking look.
Absolutely. And you consider, everything you can see here has only been here over the last, since I've got to think, 2014, really. That's really when everything, your double cask, your 15, your Victoriana burst onto the scene. Then obviously later your 18 and your 25-year-olds. All these products didn't exist before that. So it's great to see, the distillery, get to where it really should be. It should be, so it's wonderful. And yeah, I mean, Campbeltown itself, what a wonderful place. Springbank's been carrying that flag for so long. It's wonderful to see another distillery out of these 36 distilleries that was here. Wonderful to see Glen Scotia back there, back at the fore, back at the coalface, and earning its living again. So.
Well, one of the things Mark Watt said to us years ago was nobody drives through Campbeltown on their way to somewhere. You have to come here for a reason, and whether that's the distilleries or the up and coming bars, the hotels that are here. One of the things that's so striking is you get rewarded when you come to Campbelltown, and you get welcomed. And from my conversations with some of these new incoming distilleries, that's something that they're very aware of.
Yes.
And they're going to do their part in welcoming people to the town, along with these bigger, more established distilleries that are doing a wonderful job.
Absolutely.
Of that.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's something I've always been conscious of from the early days of Glen Scotia, because as I say, when visitors used to rock up at the gate there, and there was maybe one or two of them, and these guys would educate me about Glen Scotia, bearing in mind. But you wondered why they were here, but it showed you the passion, and it's that passion from visitors, people like yourself,
Cheers.
Jason and Jess, and Joshua, Single Cask Nation.
Cheers.
It's people like you. It really drives these brands on. You really do. It's fantastic. It really is. And I think for, as you mentioned, the new distilleries, I think they're aware of, how. I've not been to a lot of distilleries, and I'm ashamed to say, but I think when you come to Campbeltown, you do get a welcome. You get you're taken in, and you're obviously spend time with you, and I think that's important. I think that's important in any distillery, that you've got to be courteous, you've got to be friendly, because at the end of the day, the spirit quality and the drams are one thing, but your reputation is another.
Well said. Very well said.
I totally agree with what you're saying. I think it's also a great way to create brand ambassadors, maybe not in the form of my role, but in people that become passionate. And I think the festival here, and obviously the one that follows on Isla, shows these people who become so dedicated to the brands that they're willing to literally travel the face of the earth to go to a building where this liquid is produced, which is essentially what it is. And I often talk to people who don't, unbelievably, I do actually have some non-whiskey people in my life. I keep their numbers down, though. limit them quietly.
Didn't know that previously.
I know, I'm so embarrassed. I'm converting them all one by one. That you like you said, and Mark's got it totally on the head. I can't think of many things that I know of where people will travel the world to come to a funny bit on the west coast and the wet side of Scotland and to spend time. And sometimes the weather gods are kind to us and sometimes the weather gods are not so kind, just to hang out. And it creates this wonderful community that during lockdown has obviously been very virtual. And I said when we first met, it's been amazing walking around the town, meeting people that I haven't seen obviously because of COVID, and people that we've bonded over Zooms and tastings and spent time with each other in a virtual format. And now we're finally being afforded an opportunity to do it in person. And what better place than to do it at a distillery or, you know, in a warehouse, what like a hallowed ground that is to be in a tasting. So whilst on a practical level for us, picking casks and trying samples in a warehouse is not optimal conditions. But what a place to go and drink. Like, maybe this new make tastes a little bit better because I'm sat in the distillery manager's office tasting it.
Absolutely.
You know, and what a lovely collective experience. That's something I talk about all the time, that whiskey is such a collective community experience. And getting to interact with people such as yourself is lovely. It adds value into what we're all doing in Campbeltown on a wet Friday, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, Jess. Absolutely, and that it is, you know, and that's what it's all about, you know. And when you do break it down, when you do think of you know exactly what they're doing, you know, the people are travelling halfway around the world to go to a 19th century building, you know, to see a production process. It's quite remarkable.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are other niche interests that I'm not. Whiskey is very time consuming. I don't have time for that. But, you know, like talking to Ian Allen this week about, you know, like Lego and people. I have friends that are very into cars and they travel the world going to car shows. And, you know, there are other people with this same idea of bringing people together. I just think whiskey is the most fun one to do because then we get to crack open a bottle and sit like this. We had like you said, a tidy table to start with, and now we've opened a few bottles and we've got some drams, right? And a dishevelled. It's a fine looking table for a dishevelled table. I like it's good looking, you know. And to me, that's really what this is all about. And actually, you know, the whiskey is a great lubricant for conversation, and you know, we get to discuss, let's see what this bourbon has done on our new make, or what happens if we mix distilleries and we take their casks and put, you know, other people's liquid into it. But at the end of the day, it's all about human connection, which definitely lots of people have missed during lockdown. So this is just lovely. Thank you very much.
Well, my pleasure. As I say, it's absolutely wonderful, and as you quite rightly say, you know, whiskey, it's amazing stuff, isn't it? It does bring everyone together. It's more than just a drink. Yeah, it's everything, isn't it? It's a history. It's a social aspect. It's you know, it's just so many different factors. It's absolutely unique.
There's probably a reason why we're not sat around here with, you know, 5 different glasses of Vimto or Robinson's fruit squash or another non-alcoholic beverage.
We're not sitting in a tyre factory.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, it's not really got the same appeal, you know. It's funny though, isn't it? But I think it's worth mentioning too, because you tend to find that everybody, you know, obviously the whiskey communities, there's a lot of different tiers, isn't there? People come from different levels of life, you know, and everyone's got their own issues and problems. But the amazing thing is with whiskey, it tends to unite everyone. It tends to bring everyone together, and everyone tends to just have the same outlook, you know, and the same methodology, if you like. You know, it's quite amazing. Quite amazing.
Certainly, on the, you know, growing up on the west coast of Scotland, I was raised never to talk religion or politics.
Yes.
And there's nothing like getting together with a range of people, as you rightly point out, and talk whiskey. You don't have to bring up the politics. You don't have to bring up the religion. It doesn't matter who you are and what brought you to this spot. We can talk about what's in our glass.
That's it.
And that's refreshing in this day and age to have that opportunity.
It certainly is, Jason. Absolutely. It really is. We like to strip it back to basics, you know, but yet that can be so complex. You know, it can be quite a complex discussion, very technical, very scientific.
Absolutely. It's good to lose yourself in that detail and not the other details.
Absolutely.
Do you want to get us out of here with our traditional final question?
Yes.
You know our podcast inside out and back to front and well enough.
Well, I had usually there's a number of things that by the time we get to the interview, I'm like, I need to mentally write this down. And I've got lost in these really lovely. I've just finished the end of this bourbon. That is a cracking dram.
Really delicious.
Yeah,
really
absolutely
delicious.
brilliant. I'll end up waffling for another. If anyone's having root canal surgery listening to this, they'll be mostly done by the time I finish with the question.
Well, we can skip to what's the most exciting. What's the exciting thing for the future?
I was going to say I was in the ad show last night and we got to try the bottling of Glen Scotia, which is for them, and I've had a series. While I've been, visiting them over a few years, and they're all kind of this young age. One of the things I was going to say when we were talking about maturation, one of the things I really enjoy about Glen Scotia is that you guys are not afraid of having kind of the younger-ish age, and it is prominently on the labels. You're not hiding. It's not a surprise sneak attack 6-year-old whiskey or whatever. Actually, I wouldn't care if it was, but I have really enjoyed that. A lot of these single casks that I've had recently, I think the one in the Glen Scotia in the ad show last night is also a 9, like the festival dinner. I really enjoyed it, and I was wondering if there was. It also, for those of us at home, it creates a great price point for buying these single casks that kind of sub, well under 100, usually 60, 70, 80 pounds. So that's a great bang for buck dram. I was curious if that's a sort of semi-deliberate that we're keeping it on a younger age. And if it is, it's a great boon to you because these whiskies are fantastic at a young age, and it makes me excited to try, treat yourself with the slightly older ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, Jess. Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's really just a case of, I like, whether it's right or wrong, I like demonstrating, conveying, showing, what the distillery can do and what the distillery is capable of. I think that's really, really important. And you mentioned Nard Shield; they've been fantastic. I've known Flora and Marion for a long, long time, and they've got a Glen Scotia single cask, and they're so passionate about their single cask. Well, they're so passionate about whiskey in general, to be fair. So lovely people. But yeah, I mean, for me, it's just, it's really just conveying and getting it out there. It is quite young. But I think it's really, I think it really stands on its own. Doesn't need any finishing. Just it is what it is.
And I think that's lovely. That adds to, we're in Campbeltown, we're drinking in a bar, and they're picking a single cask from a distillery that's, across the water. It's lovely to be able to extend that beyond the passion for the distillery, but, tying it in with local people who are also great ambassadors. They're fantastic in there, and I've had several of their single casks offerings that are, for them, or they take part in the Independent Bars of Scotland single cask bottlings. It's great to be in a bar with local people who are so passionate and being able to champion, something that's you can point almost from the bar to here.
Yeah.
And again, that all ties back into this sense of place. And to me, that is just so exciting, so special to be able to, do that. Scotland, we're very lucky that we have that. We're in a position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's although we've got some great distilleries that are not far from where Jason lives. We're having a slightly different angle. We're getting to tell the story of single cask nation, but which is something I love doing. But it's lovely to also be somewhere with some other local champions. So it's a real credit to what you guys are doing here, and then releasing it into the wild for us to drink.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, no, it's that's what it's all about. I say it really is, and it wasn't that long ago where if you went out in Campbeltown, there would be no Glen Scotia. Mm-hmm. Glen Scotia was unobtainable. So it's fantastic to see it back in the public psyche again. So long may it continue.
Yeah, it's exciting, and with that in mind. You're a busy chap. We appreciate your time at the end of a busy week.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
One more question to get us out of here is a question we ask a lot of industry friends, which is, what are you most excited about as you cast an eye forward? What's coming for Iain? What's coming for Glen Scotia? What's coming for Campbeltown? What's got you jumping out of bed in the morning?
Well, quite simply, the renaissance of Campbeltown. You're going to see more distilleries here. So I think it's absolutely going to be fascinating. It's taken a long time to get to this point, but yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing these other distilleries in Campbeltown. I think it's really going to make it a serious destination now.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice. Any additions to the Glen Scotia line coming down the pipeline? Anything you're secretly working on behind the scenes? Get you off piste a little more?
Aye, well, there's a few different ones. You know, we're looking at double cask, a different twist and that. We're always looking at seasonal releases, you know, so they'll be quite interesting. Different finishes again, sherry orientated, but different sherry we've never used before. So yeah, there's going to be a few different things coming along the lines. So yeah, it's good. Keeps us going. You got to keep going.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, enjoy your week off coming up next
Thank
week.
you.
It's been an absolute joy and a pleasure, and your hospitality is second to none. So cheers to you, my friend. It's been brilliant seeing you.
Thank you, Single Cask Nation. Thank you, Jason, Joshua, and Jess. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Sincere thanks again to Iain for making time for myself and Jess at the end of what was a crazy week for him. He was on his way to a well-deserved week off after recording with us. I'm always amazed by him and his energy, his passion, his enthusiasm. And I think one thing that was clear through this conversation is not only how proud he is of his work and his team's work at Glen Scotia Distillery, but how proud he is of Campbeltown.
Yeah.
And the way I was able to ask him that question about this new wave of Campbeltown distilleries that we just talked about on the last extra. Which was a ton of fun and such great response from the listeners around that kind of slightly more loosey-goosey episode of Extra. But for him, Iain McAlister, to know that Glen Scotia is on firm footing and that they've got their distillate right, they've got their maturation program right, they've got their livery right. I think there's, I don't know if there was ever a weight on his shoulders per se, but you can see the way he sits tall. You can see the pride. You can see the honor that he takes. Yeah. And I think he is very welcoming of these new Campbeltown distilleries. And it'll only give people more reason to drive by Kennacraig and come on down into Campbeltown and see what the tune has to offer. So I love the guy. I really do love the guy. And Jess and I were absolutely treated to some cracking drams and some cracking conversation. And I hope our listeners got that feeling of being a fly on the wall, of just a very natural, normal, chitty-chatty, as I like to say.
I was so gutted to be forced to stay home. Obviously, there's a host of people that I wanted to see, and I'm going to learn from my past mistakes. I'm not going to make a list of them, Jason, because I always fail and I forget people. But this was a meeting that I had set up with Iain, and I had worked to get into our calendar. And part of the reason I was so excited about it is I have this bottle of Glen Scotia that was bottled sometime in the 70s. 5-year-old liquid, 43.4% alcohol, whatever it is. And I remember, and I found it on auction. I got it for cheap too, like 40 pounds, some like ungodly small amount. And I remember sharing a picture of the bottle with Iain, and he wasn't particularly familiar with it. And so internally I said, you know what? When we go over there, I'm going to bring this and we're going to open it together. And, not being able to see him because he is such a lovely dude. that killed me. And not being able to open this and share it with him and have you and Jess and just all four of us drinking this, historic bottling that even the distillery manager wasn't too familiar with. Yeah, I'm sad to have missed that opportunity, but next time. But so speaking of Glen Scotia bottling,
next year in Campbeltown.
Next year in Campbell. That's what we say at the end of every Passover. Next year in Campbeltown. I will tell you, however, I did just open up a bottle of Glen Scotia. It's a single cask for Drammers. Speaking of One Nation Under Whiskey, our last episode was a live Drammers event, and right, and I saw Charlie at a Connecticut Drammers event, and he had 2 Glen Scotia single casks. One was an unpeated one, and one was peated. And the one I opened was a peated, and you could see the color on this. It's good dark color. 10 years old. That's first fill bourbon. It looks like it could be a 35-year-old first fill bourbon. So good color coming from it. And listen to this. I love these tasting notes. Gentle peat smokiness and sweet pineapple notes that intermingle with sea salted caramel and oak vanilla. Oak vanilla, that's an interesting thing. An aroma of zesty orange peel and spiced apple mellows to reveal delicate toasted almond and warming cinnamon to finish. I would only disagree by saying it's a bit more heavy-handed with the peat than the label likes to lead on. But it is such a well-composed single cask. And when I tasted it, I had to get a few bottles. And of course, Jason, you've got a bottle on your way, or it's on its way to you. I'm having a real tough time with the English language today, Jason.
Summer months. It's the summer months, dude. It's the summer months. And the COVID brain. Let's not forget the COVID brain.
This pour is in honor of Iain McAlister and in honor of Charlie and the folks at Drammers for being the hosts of our 10-year anniversary. So,
indeed, I will lift my great King Street to them as well. Cheers.
Cheers. I guess my next question for you, Jason, is: do we have any news that we would like to share with our listeners? And if the answer is yes, is there so much news that we have to wake the paper boy, or is it only a smaller amount of news that maybe we can let sleeping jerks lie? Because he is a bit of a jerk, I mean, if we're being honest.
Let's wake him up.
All right.
Extra, extra! Read all about it! Life story of Playboy Penny! Extra, extra! Extra, extra! Read all about it! Me and that Playboy in trouble!
There he is. He's pissed. Jason, you hear the tone in his voice? Read all about it. Millionaire Playboy in trouble again. Extra, extra!
It's funny, I was just poking the paperboy as well because I really don't have that much to say.
But easy.
Easy. Talk about incestuous.
Whoa. This got real dark.
Oh, I was thinking incense. No, that's very different. Beat poets? Beat kids. Beat kids.
Beat kids. Oh, beat kids. Oh my gosh, beat kids.
Kids on the beat. Beat kids.
So good.
Wonder Chosen was magnificent.
So
all
great.
Listeners should search it out on the YouTubes. Wonder Chosen. Oh,
excellent. Beat kids.
Kids on the beat. Beat kids. So since we're here, just one of the things you and I have talked about for a wee while was trying to get product on the website. We do have product on the website. Our shipper is on vacation. And so the products that are on the website, they are still in stock. We do still have a little bit of Sheriff Muir, a little bit of Torridon, a little bit of Beanley, and like I said earlier in today's podcast, a little bit, about 100 bottles of the 600 plus that came from Sherry Butt 666. We do have those, so that's 4 things in stock, but they will be shipping in July. And so the website front page says sold out. If you click through on any item, it says stock will return in July.
Yeah.
So So that will be happening there. The Good Ride bottles, the collaboration we did for Tanks for Troops with Kerry Hart and Big B, such a sweetheart guy. I smile every time I think of Big B. Just such a nice big guy. Talk about looking up to somebody. When I stood there, I looked up to look at Big B's eyes, and at 6'2", I don't get that all the time.
No, you don't. I think he's as tall as your brother.
He's up there.
He's a 6'6"er.
He is a 6'6"er. Gosh, just spent a week with my 6'6" brother. And what a brother he is. And he was very kind. He and Nicola putting me up was so kind, and I do deeply regret my sister-in-law contracting COVID while I was quarantining in her house. Hashtag awkward. But Good Ride is available. It is available for purchase. It will also ship in July. We just want to keep the momentum going there. So if you want to help us meet that target for the charity, which is a big old target.
Yeah, and just to clarify, again, I feel as if I did this earlier with the Backwoods. For those of you that aren't familiar with this Good Ride bottling, so Good Ride is a charitable organization, like you had said, with Kerry Hart, who is Pink's husband. He's also a famous motocross guy, and Big B, his friend, who's also a rapper. And the idea is we wanted to bottle a cask of bourbon for them to help them raise $20,000 for their charity. This is Tanks for Troops, right? They supported our troops. We support our troops. We want to help them out. And so you're going to see a bottle on our website, and it's going to say $200 for that bottle. But please know, more than 50% of that overall price is going to charity. Yes, it's a 5-year-old bourbon, MGP bourbon, but the majority of that money is going to troops. It's going to help those in need who've helped our country. So if you want to help the troops, if you're interested in a really tasty whiskey to share with friends and loved ones, please do check it out.
Yeah, well said. And the label's cracking, the liquid's cracking, the cause is cracking, the collaboration was cracking. I think we're all happy we did that. That was a fun kind of thing to do. I will give you another bit of news, is getting to spend that time in Scotland with our very own dear Jess gave us a chance to visit with our bottling hall and try to talk through, we've got some big bottlings that we've been working through this first half of the year. We've got bottlings that we've been looking at for the rest of the year. Things aren't always moving swiftly or smoothly, as we alluded to earlier today. We've been talking about the Backwoods coming in from Australia for months and months and months. But we've got American releases, we've got Canadian releases, we've got the next rest of the world from Jess, and we actually tasted one of those casks while we were in a warehouse at our bottling hall.
All right.
And Jess was very happy. This is her selection.
Oh, I
her
know which one you're
cask.
talking about.
No, you
Oh, I
don't.
don't?
No, you
I
don't.
don't?
I know which one you're thinking
I
about.
am the one Neil
And it's
Patrick
not
Harris
that
was
one.
drinking.
No, that's not in ROW4. So, there's another. This is what I love about our Jess, is she's got some secret projects going on
God love her.
that
Yep.
she's keeping an eye on, and we actually tasted one of the casks with the owner of the bottling hall, and he loved it as well. He's a big fan of this distillery. So that was a lot of fun getting to see Jess up close, getting excited about her cask and her projects. She does wonderful work as our global sales manager, and she and I were just having a meeting the other day where that job title doesn't even get close to the number of things she does. But I like saying it, I like throwing it around. But knowing how passionate she is about whiskey and how competent she is at overcoming post-Brexit legislature. Holy moly, it's a big ask. So, well done to our Jess. And within this news segment, there are a number of projects that we're trying to push over the finish line. And it is a difficult year, and it has been a difficult year. But we continue to push the water uphill.
Do you remember, you don't like scary movies because you're a chicken shit. Have you...
Interesting way of presenting it. I just feel like they appeal to a lowest common denominator, like not particular deep thinker moviegoer, but that's neither here nor there. Carry on.
Wow, you've just, there are a number of people that have driven themselves off the road because they couldn't believe.
I don't believe any of our listeners are fans of horror movies.
Couldn't believe what plain old Jason.
Don't think that's possible.
Plain old run of the mill Jason had to say. Have you seen?
Yeah, you don't get to call me chicken shit without an intellectual throwdown. So let's be honest, you poked the bear on that one, and you didn't like what you got in return.
You're just lucky that I'm not an intellectual. So, wait, did I just cut myself?
I think the word you're looking for is incestuous.
It is incestuous. Hashtag whiskey incest at whiskey incest. So listen. I bring up this horror film because I want to know, have you seen the movie Poltergeist?
Oh, way back in my youth. That was formative in me avoiding horror movies the rest of my life.
Brilliant movie. I watch that movie at least twice per year because it remains excellent. Anyway,
twice a year, that's remarkable.
But I bring this up because of your point before where you talk about all of these various projects that you try to get over the finish line, but it seems as if every time we get to the finish line, that line moves up a little bit. And it reminds me of the scene when the mom is trying to save her daughter, Carol Ann, from the big closet monster that's going to eat them, eat her, Carol Ann and little Robbie, her son. And as she's running down the hallway to the door, the hallway stretches. And that's what all these projects feel like. Like, there's a finish line. Nope, it's stretching. It's getting farther away.
So let me give you another movie reference then that I think captures the exact same metaphor.
Human Centipede.
Do you remember in Time Bandits?
Yes.
When the Time Bandits appear in the young boy's room.
Yeah.
And everyone's kind of freaking out, and then the Time Bandits start pushing the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And then the wall starts stretching back and back and back and back and keeps on going. And so I think that's pushing these casks uphill, and they just keep going and going, and the hill never ends. So
never ends.
This isn't really going to get us out of the news segment, but as I've been sitting here, and obviously we've been talking about Jess sent me a sample of the Adelphi Ardna Gherkin, which has been a UK release.
What, Ardna Gherkin?
And Ardna Gherkin. And it's been pitched as this kind of pungent, pickly, briny release. And Jess and I joked, and no offense to our friends at Adelphi here, but Jess and I joked that it's called Ardna Gherkin because you couldn't really get away with calling it Ardna Cowshit, because when you stick your nose in it, it's all cowshed, cow buyer, cow shit. The Gherkin component, and the reason I bring this up on the podcast. And this may or may not appear in the final edit. But the reason I keep this that I bring this up in the podcast is I just opened the cap on the sample just to give it a nose. And boy, does that smell exactly like it did when I first nosed it 2 weeks
there
ago.
You go. Making progress, Jason.
Holy mac. And here's the thing. It smells like a warm rock fort that has been out on a kitchen table all afternoon on a warm summer's day.
I want to drink all of that. I love all those off notes. Oh my gosh, Jason. No, see, that's the kind of whiskey. And here's the thing. That's so interesting, though, right? Because it seems so far out of Ardnamurchan's profile, but that's the kind of whiskey that you need a bottle. You may need two of them because you're going to invite friends over, and it's one of those ones where you're like, you have to try this. Like it or love it. I like it or love it. See, I can't do the English language. Love it or hate it. It's a conversation piece. So now I need a bottle of it.
Well, and that's exactly what Jess and Sweet Scott have been doing with their bottle of it. Is they've been pouring it for people and saying like, "Oh, you won't believe what this is doing. This is wild." And the nose of it actually reminds me of the sample bottles that you and I used to share with friends. And a certain Oliver Chilton that was the Westland Tabasco cask.
The Inferno.
When it had that big blue cheese note, like a warm blue cheese note. Yeah. And just a big pungency where you go, I don't think I can drink this. And then you go, I got to taste it. And you go, I wish I hadn't drunk that. I wish I hadn't even smelled it. That's what else the Ardna Gherkin puts me in mind of. And so please don't take Ardna cow shit as me running this into the ground. I think this does exactly what it says on the tin. It's big, it's obnoxious, it's difficult, it's pronounced.
Sounds awesome. Oh my gosh.
We might say nefarious.
Oh, is it nefarious? Finally, a use for the word nefarious.
So there you go. Yeah, go have a look out for a Delphi Ardna Gherkin. Grab a bottle, pour it for friends. It's wacky and wild. Completely out the Ardnamurchan profile. As you rightly say, it was also matured in, I believe, an ex-bourbon cask from the Glenmurray Distillery.
Oh, interesting.
And so neither of those two components should have turned into Ardna Gherkin or Ardna cow shit.
Do you think Connell just maybe dropped a couple pickles in the cask or something? She's walking around the warehouse.
What Connell does after hours is Connell's own business.
Listen, if we're done with news, I wanted to bring up an email that we received. And actually,
go for it.
And actually, this is the second email from a one Malcolm Geffen, not to be confused with Geffen Records, because his last name is spelled differently than Stephen Geffen or whomever it was. The email said, and actually he sent this email a second time, just like the Frenchman from the Holy Grail. It's like, I shall taunt you a second time. So he sent another email. He says,
sounded more like Inspector Clouseau from the Pink Panther movie.
Is he or is he not French?
Inspector Clouseau?
Yeah.
Played by Peter Sellers with a terrible French accent.
I feel like I nailed it. Apologies, any and all French people. So Mal, he goes, I don't know if he goes by Mal or by Malcolm, but in one point he said Mal. So anyway, we'll call him Mal. He says,
is he a malcontent?
Oh, he's a Mal Geffen? What's the opposite of Mal? That's bad. Mal means bad. What does good mean in your Latin prefixes? I'm not getting answers from him.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. Good question. I bet I know the answer without knowing the answer.
You know what? I bet you do. I bet you do. So anyway.
It's like all those people having sophisticated palates who like the Catoctin Creek who don't think they've got sophisticated palates.
There you go. And you know what? You do. Pour a glass. Enjoy it because it's damn good. So rely on your palate. You're smart. You've got this. Enjoy it.
You talking to me or are you talking to the listeners?
Talking to everybody. So Mal says, not sure if you got my first email I sent, so I'm tweaking the email address and sending it a second time. Oh, that's why. Oh. So the first time he sent it, it was Malcolm. And the second time he sent it, it was Mal. So there you go. So it was like, just in case you didn't get my email. Got it. So he says...
He didn't tweak the questions at onenationunderwhiskey.com address?
I don't know. So he says, I've been...
That would make much more sense.
I've been a traditional Scotch and bourbon drinker. Recently, I got into cocktails and need to learn a lot. Not too long ago, I was listening to your quote-unquote podcast, maybe more than one, where you guys, including Elijah, were talking about mezcal. At the time, I listened with a faint heart. Now, yeah, right? He says, now, though, my cocktail journey has taken me to mezcal. Can you provide me with the episodes where you discussed it and maybe give me the proper spellings of the same? So the good news is we can find him that episode. So he continues with a suggestion. And it goes on, it says, I wrote down Jason's riff on a Negroni, which leads me to an idea for you to consider. Periodically, provide the listeners with a cocktail recipe that either of you enjoy so that we can try it. It would give us a new way to expand our whiskey palates while we would have fun trying them out. Cheers. So, I did a little bit of homework. I wouldn't even call it homework. There's a cocktail that I have been enjoying that I wanted to share with Mal and with our listeners.
Nice.
But I did do a little bit of homework on his question regarding the mezcal. And if you go, Mal, if you go to our website, onenationunderwhiskey.com, and you just, in the navigation, you go to season 5 on Cinco de Mayo on May 5th. That's our episode with Elijah and with Jess, and we're tasting these mezcals blindly. And you can actually, while we didn't list them out, you can look at the picture, and you should be able to see all of the names of the mezcals on there. And yeah,
episode 6.
Yeah, season 5, episode
season
6.
5.
Yeah, there you go. And so
we'll get you where you're going.
I have a cocktail that I learned in May, and now I can't stop making it.
Okay.
No, let me change that. I won't stop making it.
Can't stop, won't stop.
Because it's delicious. And so, hear me out. You ready? Now, some people, when I say this, they're going to say, either A, they'll say, that's not a real cocktail. And then I'm going to go into my explanation as to why it is and why your understanding of it is not necessarily accurate.
So are you saying you've created this?
No.
Or you found
I
this
found
somewhere?
this. I found this.
Okay.
And then some of you who know it may say, you know what? That is a good cocktail. It may be too common to some people's palate or their experience with cocktails. But for me, as someone who's, and like yourself, who's just trying out new stuff to see where your palate goes, see where cocktails go, it was a revelation as doing all the things that I wanted to do. So, this is a rum cocktail. Mm-hmm. And it is called a daiquiri.
Okay.
Now, some people, as soon as I say daiquiri, they're like, is it a strawberry daiquiri? Is it a pineapple daiquiri? Is it that pineapple coconut thing? No, that's a pina colada. It's none of those. So there's a cocktail that's just called a daiquiri. It's a classic daiquiri. Do you know about this cocktail, Jason?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Dave Broom talks about it in his rum book, where he's sampling tons and tons of rums. Daiquiri's one of the applications.
It is phenomenal. So I'll tell you what it is. I personally use Black Tot Finest Caribbean in part because that's right. That's you have a bottle.
Not only do I have it sitting next to me, I got my brother and his wife a bottle as a thank you for having me for the week.
Look at that. What a guy.
Yeah.
What a guy.
Yeah.
So it's really...
I got him another rum as well, but it's a rum liqueur, and we're not going to talk about it on One Nation Under Whiskey.
No. So a daiquiri, a classic daiquiri, is really easy. Load your cocktail shaker up with ice. Put 2 ounces of your favorite rum in there, preferably a darker rum, one that has a bit more oak influence in it, and preferably a dry rum, not a sugared rum, not something where they've added them in. This is one of the reasons I use Black Tot. It's a natural rum. They're very transparent about how they make it. But I would suggest there are plenty of other brands out there. If you have favorites, go ahead and use that. So it's 2 ounces of the rum, 1 ounce of lime juice, and then 3/4 ounce either simple syrup or just a really good sugar. Don't use your diamond white sugar. Like, use a good natural sugar and shake the living hell out of it. Pour it in your glass.
Would agave or maple syrup work in this application?
I would argue that maple syrup is going to do things that is going to take you out of the flavor profile of a daiquiri, but I would also argue that would be a lot of fun to try. So, right?
Well, if you remember back to me talking about the Toronto in one of the episodes, that little 1/4 ounce maple syrup, really elevated.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
So I think it's worth experimenting.
I think it, without a doubt, right? I'll give it a go. I've been using just a good simple syrup, a house-made simple syrup, which is just a 50-50 of water and sugar. You boil it up, put it in a bottle, chill it. So again, 2 ounces rum, 1 ounce of good lime juice, and about 3/4 ounce of simple syrup. Shake it up with the ice. Pour it into a glass. Even a martini glass would work. And you would think an ounce of lime is going to blow your head off. But it doesn't, because the oak forward, that vanilla forward rum helps to balance out that sharp tartness of the lime. So you end up just getting this, at least the one I do, I could taste all of the components without one overwhelming the other, right? Back to our Catoctin Creek whiskey where everything is just balanced beautifully. That's what this is doing. And it is so bright and so refreshing and so stupid easy. And even for my wife, who doesn't really like rum, she's like, this is an excellent cocktail. So there you go. That's.
I'm telling you, anytime you get to throw an ounce of lime juice into a cocktail, you've got my attention, right? That's what I love about the Gringroni, is it's that ounce of lime. Oh, love the brightness of lime.
And
that daiquiri sounds tasty.
Yeah, it's really good. I'd give it a go. Again, some people, when you hear daiquiri, you think of that frozen strawberry mix with a bit of rum, or No. This is
misleading.
You get a good rum with good lime juice, good sugar, good simple syrup, and it is a game changer, right? It's kind of like, I see some people will do bourbon cocktails and they'll put Blanton's in there or Elmer T. Lee, or sometimes they'll go even beyond that, and people say, why are you using such a great bourbon for your cocktail? The better the ingredients, the better the cocktail. It's your bottle. Could you imagine, right?
Can you imagine asking a chef, like, why are you using the best ingredients in that meal?
Right.
Like, what are you thinking? Think of the expense.
Think of the expense.
Use cheaper ingredients when you produce food dishes. What are you thinking? Yeah, get the good stuff used. God, living in a crazy time of inflation, use the best stuff you can afford.
There you go. So that is my cocktail suggestion. And so, Jason, you don't need to do one today because I didn't task you with this. But I really like Mal's suggestion of creating that cocktail, or figuring out a cocktail to share with people. You did it with your Toronto. You did it with your Gringroni. I did it now with my daiquiri. I've got a few other go-tos, so let's incorporate it every now and again.
Yeah, Mal is not the first person to suggest that we should be doing this, and so I think there'll be some fun to be had along the way, periodically bring it up. Cool.
Well, Jason, listeners, this brings us basically to the close of our podcast. However, there's something incredibly important I want to bring up, and someone's name I want to share as well. So we've been asking all of our listeners to go to Apple Podcasts and give us a good review, 5-star review, if you will. And if you...
Please and thank you.
Please and thank you. And if you make a comment, we will read it on the podcast. And here we are. And so we have a new one that I wanted to read. And this one came from Aramon 5674, which 5670, it sounds like a Hebrew year, but here we are in the year 5770 something. So, are we? What year are we in? What sort of Jewish year are we in? Anyway,
I was kind of relying on you on that one. So
oh, sure. Look at you. Rely on the Jewish guy. Look at that.
Jewish. Here. We are in 5782.
There you go,
Joshua.
5782. So there's a good chance that Aramon, who was born in 5674, who is 92 years old, wrote in, you know what, that 5674 could be anything. Anyway, this person wrote in.
It's not a zip code, we know that much.
And the title is Awesome and Organic. And Aramon, not to be confused with Saruman, two very different people, writes and says...
Or Faramir.
Or Boromir.
Or Gimli.
Why did I just run out of fucking... I ran out of dwarves. I ran out of... or Legolas. Or Galadriel. Anyway, so Aramon said... Oh my gosh.
It's always the Galadriel with you.
So Aramon 5674 says, want to learn about whiskey? Want to hear some great jokes? Want to feel like you're...
Easy, pump the brakes on that one. Pump the brakes.
Jason, my jokes are fantastic.
In your mind, they are the best around, and that's...
Really quick, I don't know why this reminded me of this. Really quickly, did you hear that the CEO of IKEA was just voted in as the Prime Minister of Sweden?
Okay.
He's building his cabinet now. All right. So, see? Great jokes, right? Anyway.
This is me humoring you.
And I just humored you with a joke. Gave you humor. Anyway, want to learn a lot about whiskey? Want to hear some great jokes? Want to feel like you're just hanging out with some friends? This podcast has it all. The hosts and their guests have a ton of information about whiskey and the industry. I learn a cool new fact or 10 each episode. Whoa. I love that.
Whoa.
They also somehow make everything seem so organic. Interviews feel like conversations instead of scripted. And when they're just chatting amongst themselves, it still feels fun and fluid, like you're hanging out with some old friends. How nice is that?
Yeah, not to give away too much, but the reason it sounds unscripted is that we have no script. Like and the fact that you and I sound seemingly organic is, once again, we have no script. We are just absolutely making shit up as we go along at all points.
So I'm looking at my papers here. You just talked over my line. So
from the top.
No,
from the top.
Listen, you know, Aramon 5674 and Jason and our listeners, I will tell you this. So many people come up to me when I'm traveling around, I'm doing a tasting, and they pull me to the side and they say...
Did they say, sir? Do they have a tear in their eye and they say, sir?
They say, sir. The number of compliments I receive regarding the podcast as I go around or as I'm on Zoom events or what have you is astounding. And my reply is always the same. This is the most fun that I have. This is where, like, it used to be, like, when it comes to whiskey, right? It used to be, before we owned a business, before whiskey paid the bills, we were just having fun, organic whiskey conversations. And now things have changed a little bit because now we rely on the whiskey to pay the bills. And you have to have sort of a salesperson's hat on sometimes when you're talking about whiskey or leading a tasting or what have you, but when we can just step back and have a conversation with a producer, with a brand owner, with a blender, with a distillery manager, or just between ourselves, we're having the whiskey conversations that we were having before all of this nonsense happened, right? It was just, it's back to that fun that got me excited about whiskey from the get-go. And so, yeah, this is, when it comes to whiskey, this is the most fun that I have, is just sitting down and talking with you and talking to our guests.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I know that as I'm sitting there, and I've said this before, I'm cognizant of the listeners that we're representing. And we have a nerdy listenership. We have a geeky listenership. They want to hear some subtle ins and outs, whether it's the global supply chain, or it's cask maturation, or it's distillation, or it's yeast, right? These are all the things they want to hear about. And so I'm always aware of where we're taking a conversation. Obviously, at the same time, we're having fun. We're making dumb jokes. We're quite happily telling Iain McAlister just how handsome he is. And he is strikingly handsome.
Remarkably handsome.
Remarkably handsome. I told him, Captain Birdseye has got nothing on him.
He looks like Ray Fiennes to me. He's just this stunningly handsome dude. Like what the hell? A, you're super nice. B, you turn this distillery around that's had this sort of this history, this checkered history. Yeah, there you go. That's better. You have this distillery that's had a bit of a checkered history. You turn it around, and you're disturbingly gorgeous. Like, you're oppressively good looking.
Disturbingly?
It's almost disturbing how good looking he is. Right? I mean, come on.
And you're nefariously good looking. To quote Joshua Hatton.
Anyway, listen.
All right, let's wrap it up. We'll fall into the usual man love trap that we invariably fall into.
Man Love Trap, Volume 6. One of my favorite in the whole series. But so
now you know why I was delayed a week in Scotland.
Thank you again, Jason, for going out there and wearing the Single Cask Nation hat, talking with so many of our industry friends out there, and recording this conversation between you, Iain, and Jess. It was remarkable. Thanks, of course, to Iain McAlister, and to Jess, of course, and as always, to our listeners, and to Aramon 5674, our 92-year-old whiskey podcast listener.
Yeah, that's rocking. The fact that people listen, recommend, the fact that Lee Atwood at Backwoods is listening to us back in the day while making some of his early whiskey. It's crazy. Yeah, absolutely crazy. There's a whole world out there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love it. I absolutely love it. So cheers to all of them, and cheers to you, Joshua. Always appreciate the edits that you make in post to keep this a nice tight 35 minutes. Oh, wrong episode.
Wrong episode. All right. Two chins.
Oh, we're two chins. Oh gosh, I got this.
What are you doing?
All right, I got this, and oh gosh, I'm not sure I've got much else. So, fingers crossed.
Right, two chins and cheers and peace.
Peace.